Welcome, internet friends, to Subscribers Storytime number 14. I want to thank all of you for being patient with me for these last few weeks. I'm in between places currently, and I'm working out of a temporary office thanks to the generosity of friends. I also wanted to let you know, in case you didn't happen to see it, I wrote a very rambly post on my Patreon page that's viewable to everyone, even non-patrons, about things I would like to do in the future on this channel to connect more with you guys. I've been thinking about live streams, maybe ones that involve playing video games. And by video games, I mean Bloodborne. Maybe starting a podcast to discuss things unrelated to this channel, maybe some more horror short stories, and hopefully, in the future, a novel of the darker things, of course. I feel like I've shown you one side of me because I hold my privacy very dear, but in doing so, I don't feel like you guys know me very well or connect to me as much as I want to, so here's me opening up a little bit, I guess. Just wanted to let you know about my brainstorming, and this stuff likely won't start until I'm in my new place in late September, but I am so looking forward to it. For real, I am. Will you please be my friend? If you don't care about all of that, I hope you enjoy the stories for today's video. We have 9 of them today, and I hope you all sit back, turn down the lights, and enjoy. I know this is going to sound just like every other story there is on this subject, but I promise on my family's lives that this is a true story. One that has haunted me for 5 years and has taken me weeks to type out and send just because of how scarred I am from it. It started as innocently as it could be. It was the summer between my junior and senior year in high school, and my friends, Steve and Dan, arranged for us to go on a camping trip in southern Ohio. We live outside of Cleveland, so the Appalachian foothills are a bit exotic for us. We knew we weren't going to a normal campsite. It was more or less a clearing that the park rangers never bothered to check for illegal campers. Steve was able to convince his father to loan him his pickup truck for the weekend, and I was convinced enough to bring my gun, my grandfather's old service M14, for anyone that's curious. I brought it mostly to calm my mother down so she wouldn't worry about me being attacked by coyotes, bears, or West Virginians. Around 12 p.m. on Friday, Steve and Dan swung around to pick me up and head down to this fabled campsite. I threw my tent, clothes, and gun into the covered bed of the pickup truck, hopped in the cab, and we were on our way. It was a decent drive, but not all that long, and by 3:30 p.m., lost somewhere between Youngstown and Marietta, we veered off the highway and into the woods that led to the site. It was my first time down south, so I was in awe of the large hills and dense forest. I was already having a great time, thanking the guys for bringing me along. Another 10 minutes through the woods and we arrived at the clearing. Not as big as I had imagined, but more than enough space for the truck and our 3 tents. We got out, stretched our legs, and hauled our gear out and set up shop. Miraculously, we did it without a hiccup or a single angry swear. I inhaled the sweet, natural air and overheard the river. At that moment, I realized just how hungry I was and told the guys to grab their rods because we were having fish for dinner. We hiked a good 20 to 30 minutes through the dense undergrowth to get to the river, and it was really nice. The details of the 4-hour-long fishing trip are of little importance, but we did come back with dinner. Returning to the site, everything looked to be in order, so Dan and I set out to get firewood from the surrounding forest while Steve cleaned the fish. I'm really not good with knives, clumsy and shaky hands. It only took 20 minutes or so for us to come back with a nice haul of wood for the night. We built up our fire and cooked up some delicious wild-caught trout. At this point, of course, I brought out my gun because who knows what kinds of animals will come out of the woods at the smell of cooked food. We ate, told jokes, shared ghost stories, and all around had a great night. Wholly uneventful. I wasn't complaining, though. I was out with 2 of my best friends with no electronics to distract us. I can't quite remember the time we went to bed, but it had to be around midnight. It took a while to get comfortable because of the sudden change from sleeping on a bed to the ground. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets, owls, and what I assumed was raccoons trying to rummage through our stuff, in vain. The next day is when, well, everything went wrong. We woke up that morning around the same time. I was ill-rested, to say the least. We cooked up a few griddle cakes and chewed on a few granola bars before deciding to go and explore the nearby woods and foothills. We packed up a few rations, I strapped my fishing pole and gun to my pack, and we were on our way. And when I say that this area was breathtaking, I'm understating just how beautiful it was. It was something straight out of a painting. I took as many pictures as I could, and as we climbed up the large hill next to our campsite, I finally saw the sheer size of the canyon we'd driven into. It took us a few hours to get to the top of the hill, I would say. If we'd just left at that moment, I would have had no regrets about this trip whatsoever. And if I knew what the night would bring us, I would have begged to leave on the spot. But I was ignorant of it, and was happy to keep on with the trip. We came back down, and the guys started another fire to cook some sausages they brought, while I propped another fish on a stick that I caught on the way back down. I have a digestive disorder that makes eating of beef, pork, and poultry incredibly painful, so I avoid it like the plague. Again, we stared at the fire, telling bad jokes and stories, all while watching the sky grow darker and darker. I spent a lot of the time staring at the sky. Being from a heavily populated area, you hardly get to see the star cover I got to see that night. Absolutely gorgeous, what dreams are made of. And that's when I heard movement from the undergrowth surrounding the site. It sounded like clicking and the scraping of wood on wood. I shrugged it off as raccoons mustering up the courage to try and steal some food, and it faded in time, so I definitely thought nothing of it. More jokes were told and topics discussed as the night went on, but the noises kept coming back, slowly and almost unnoticeably getting louder. Louder until I told the guys to shut up and let me listen. I heard a few branches bend and one break. I'm sorry, but this is where it starts to get hard to tell. To even think about what happens next. It disturbs me to the point of tears. I sit back down and attempt to shrug off the noises, but they seem to be ever present in the background of conversation now. Then a huge crack comes from behind the tents, the sounds of a large branch snapping. At this point, I once again shouted at my friends to shut up, and I stood with my gun in one of my hands, trying to see through the impenetrable darkness of the rural Ohio night. I kept my friends quiet for a full 5 minutes before I realized, where were the crickets, the frogs, the night birds? It was dead silent, and all I could hear was the fire crackling behind me. But I saw nothing, so I sat back down and laid my gun in my lap in an easy position for me to shoulder if anything came out of the woods. My friends began to joke with and mock me. I started to lighten up and joke back at them, laughing a bit here and there. The last thing on the topic said was my friend Dan saying, "Eric, you really need to calm down. I know this is your first time down south, but there's no need to be so paranoid." Those words will forever echo in my head because the sound I heard afterwards haunts my nightmares to this very day. From behind came a sound of something trying to mimic the last syllable in an inhuman, raspy, gargling voice. I shot up like a man on fire and turned to look over our tents, only to see this thing standing there on all fours. It had a humanoid face, sunken eyes, small nose, and a wide mouth. I didn't notice any teeth because I was focused on the monstrous part of it. Long, spindly limbs ending with hands and feet that seemed way too big for its size, topped with long claws. It had pale skin with a faint red hue to it, but I can't remember if that was from the fire or not. Its back was arched in a way where I could see its spine through its skin. The monstrosity slowly inched forward. For something that big, I have no idea how I didn't hear it get as close as it did. I shouldered the rifle and fired off 5 rounds as quickly and as accurately as I could. I am a rather talented rifleman, able to hit the center of a playing card at 300 yards, so I have no idea how I missed because it only pissed this thing off. It didn't seem hurt at all. We screamed like girls and ran to the truck as fast as we could, and we didn't even try to put out the fire we started. And this thing chased us with speed that didn't seem possible for its stature. I was the last one in the truck, and I slammed the door shut as Steve started it. That's when I finally glimpsed the teeth. Horrifying twin rows of sharp teeth designed perfectly to tear flesh, and its mouth opened further than it should have been possible, exposing its pink innards. I screamed again and begged Steve to drive as he slammed on the gas and wheeled his old Chevy around to the highway again. We hit 40 miles an hour on that unpaved hiking trail and 100 on the highway, and that's when I lost it, sobbing like a child to my friends. And I'm trying to hold that back now. I still have nightmares about this thing. I even sometimes think I see it in the woods around my hometown or in the corner of my eye on rare occasion. I'm never going camping in the woods again, and I haven't been camping at all since. Have you ever heard of sleep paralysis? I hadn't until a couple of years ago when a few unsettling nights forced me to take to the internet to see if what I was going through was normal. The answer I found was yes. It's a common sleep disorder. To describe it in simple terms, your mind is awake, but your body is still asleep. You can't move or speak no matter how hard you try. During an episode, I wake to the shadowy surroundings of my bedroom at night. I can even hear the muffled voices from my parents' TV in the bedroom next to me, but there's nothing I can do. I can try to get one muscle working. A few times that's been enough to shake me fully awake. Most of the time, I have to lie there and surrender until my brain falls back asleep. It's an altogether unpleasant experience. Some people even have hallucinations of shadows looming over them or demon-like creatures at the edge of the bed begging to possess them. I guess I'm fortunate enough to not have those episodes turn that ugly. However, the story that I'm sharing isn't just about my experience with sleep paralysis. It's an attempt to rationalize something I went through this past March at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. The Roosevelt, if you are unfamiliar, is an old Hollywood-style hotel that sits on bustling and tourist-worthy Hollywood Boulevard. Think Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, and Humphrey Bogart. It opened its doors in the Roaring '20s and was meant for Hollywood starlets and heartthrobs to wine and dine there. The first ever Academy Awards was held in its still-in-use ballroom, and, honestly, when you look at it, you get that vibe. It's a building that seems out of place on an otherwise modern cityscape. When you walk through its doors, you feel as if you've left the 2000s outside. As a 22nd birthday present, my parents reserved a room for myself and a friend to stay there over the weekend. At first glance, the setup was perfect. The popular location meant that my friend and I were walking distance to a lot of nightclubs and other fun activities. Did I know beforehand that the hotel is famous for its hauntings? No. Even if I did, I'm a skeptic, and so is my friend. Scary movies tend to not leave either of us restless at night. We weren't creeped out by the assumption that since it was old, it was probably haunted. If anything, we were fascinated by the vintage ambiance of the architecture. I probably even made a comment to my friend that I was happy that they didn't modernize it and kept it old school. We arrived on a Friday night. I had just driven 6 hours from Phoenix, and we were both pretty tired. We agreed to stay in, order room service, and watch movies in our room on the 9th floor. This detail matters later. Everything is fine, of course, until we shut off the lights and got in bed. The room was almost pitch black since my friend likes to close the curtains so the sunlight doesn't blind her in the morning. I wake up at 4 a.m. Already, I'm uncomfortable because I know instantly that I can't move. Great, I think to myself. Why did this have to happen to me here? So, as usual, I try to get myself to move. I can hear my friend snoring. Then, I feel it. It is the feeling of someone trying to slide the covers off of you, like your mom trying to forcefully get you out of bed in the morning, but, of course, it's not my mom. I'm lying on my side so I can't turn to see who or what was moving the covers. The feeling shifted into pressure. I already couldn't move, but whoever or whatever decided that the bedsheets weren't enough. The weight of the bed shifted, and then I felt 2 hands on my shoulders. They pushed down, further immobilizing me. I couldn't understand why this was happening. My sleep paralysis never got this bad. Not once had I hallucinated, much less felt anything. I tried to say my friend's name to get her to wake up. I couldn't move my lips. I wanted to scream, fight, and cry all at the same time, but of course, I could do none of those things either. Then the thing began to shake me as if it were trying to get my attention or get me to look its way. I must have had just enough terror running through my system to get me to turn my head a bit. Honestly, I wish I hadn't. What I saw was a young man, maybe in his mid-20s or early 30s. He looked annoyed as hell, as if I were sleeping in his bed or something. I can see he was trying to tell me something, but all I could hear was a muffled voice, as if he were speaking into a pillow. I woke myself up. I don't know how, but I did. My friend was still asleep, unaware of the event that may or may not have just transpired in the bed next to her. Not being able to go back to sleep, I grabbed my phone and began searching the history of the hotel. Sure enough, a lot of the first results that pop up are about its famous hauntings. Marilyn Monroe is a popular one. A little girl in the ballroom claiming to look for her mother is another. But then I saw him, and I felt like I was going to be sick. The man, I saw his name, Montgomery Clift. He was another Marlon Brando and James Dean of the 50s with a strong jaw and brooding eyes. Apparently, he stayed on the 9th floor for 3 months rehearsing for his role in From Here to Eternity. I had almost succeeded in convincing myself that my imagination made him up, but here he was, staring up at me. What made the realization even worse was the reported occurrences associated with Mr. Clift. Guests like myself who have stayed in a room on the 9th floor have seen him pacing the hallways outside, sometimes hearing him play the trumpet or rehearse his lines, and, of course, he's prevented people from moving while lying on the bed. So was it just my sleep paralysis acting up, or just a nightmare? Could it have been just a mere coincidence that the man I saw actually was a real person that stayed on that floor? The next morning, I asked my friend if anything weird happened that night. "Now that you mention it, I thought I heard you say my name," she said. "I woke up and tried to talk to you, but you didn't respond to me. You just kept saying, 'Go away.' I thought you were just sleep-talking, so I went back to sleep." As I mentioned before, I'm a skeptic. I try and convince myself it was just a freakishly bad episode, but it's been almost 6 months and the memory still nags at me. I've even had a few more sleep paralysis episodes since then. Not one of them has come close to what I witnessed on the 9th floor of the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. Will I ever go back? Probably not. Even if I am crazy and there's not much to take from this story, I share it for those who have once undergone or continuously go through sleep paralysis. There is some comfort in the fact that you know you aren't going through these rather terrifying experiences alone. Around my area of Pennsylvania, in the spring months, we have an event called Pike Days. It's pretty much a huge yard sale, and everyone sets up their tables down the Nation Pike Road. Tables and sales for miles. My mom went every year when we were kids, looking for good deals or items and toys she thought we'd like. At the time, I was about 7, and my sister Casey was 6. We had an even younger sister, Haley, who was 4, and our youngest sister, Abby, was just a newborn. I was the only boy and the oldest of the kids, and I was obsessed with Pokemon. Casey, who was closest to me, loved Pokemon because I loved Pokemon, and Haley didn't really seem to care either way. I owned very few Pokemon-related toys at the time, only a few cards out of a deck that was mostly lost, and a stuffed Pikachu that could talk. That year, when Pike Days rolled around, my mom told us she was going to look for a toy for each of us, as well as looking for kitchenware for her and Dad. We were excited about the prospect of some new toys, but we had no idea what we would receive. And when Mom did finally arrive home after what felt like hours, she bought us all toys she thought we'd enjoy. For Casey, it was some Disney princess doll, and Haley got Dora and Boots figures. She was carrying a massive brown grocery bag filled with all kinds of Pokemon merchandise. Of course, she told me I had to share it because she couldn't find my siblings as much, but I was ecstatic to receive all of the Pokemon gear I could ever need. There were Pokemon figures, a Pokédex, a board game, and stuffed animals. Strangely, after I carried the bag up to my room and dumped it out onto my floor, I found a digital-faced watch mixed in with all of the Pokemon-related items. It was thick and cheap-looking, a dark blue color, big enough to fit a man's wrist, and it had batteries from what I could tell, as the face displayed the time. I didn't know if it was correct, though. Even though it was out of place, I didn't really care or think much of it, and after having fun with all of my new stuff that day, I threw it into my toy chest, forgot about it, and laid down to sleep. Midnight felt late when I was a kid because all of my siblings fell asleep way before I did, and I was stuck watching cartoons all night by myself. At the time, I was watching some puppet version of Winnie the Pooh. Then, a man's voice, loud enough to echo in my room, came from the toy chest. I jumped and threw the covers over my head. I remember yelling at the voice to shut up and feeling scared for my life, and when it didn't, all I could do was cry and yell for my parents, who immediately ran upstairs to my bedroom. The voice was gone, though. It stopped before they could hear it. They calmed me down, and after I tried to explain what I'd heard, they assured me it must have been a bad dream and that I'd simply rolled over onto my talking Pikachu. And I believed them. Until the next night, when it happened again. This time the words were clear, and I didn't feel so surprised as I did the first night. I was still scared as all hell, but I wasn't so scared that I didn't listen to it.
Someone's in the house.
It was the man's voice again, clear as day. It wasn't yelling, just talking, and in response, I once again threw the covers over my head and covered my ears. With all the force of my voice, I told the damn thing to shut up, and it did. That was my life for at least a month. Stay up until I heard it, tell it to stop, repeat. One night, though, I finally had enough. I was exhausted from always being up late and scared of what was in my room, and I decided I would find out where the man's voice was coming from. So, I stayed up, waiting, but this time I didn't hide or cover my ears. I didn't tell it to quit talking. I let it keep repeating the same statement.
Someone's in the house. Someone's in the house.
And I reluctantly got out of my bed and searched. I followed the sound to my toy chest and dug through all of my toys until I found the source of the harrowing man's voice.
Someone's in the house.
The watch. The digital watch my mom didn't know was in that bag full of Pokemon gear. That was what had been causing so much terror? It stopped when I picked it up. I brought it over to my bed and hid it under my pillow, determined to prove to my parents tomorrow night that I wasn't crazy and that I wasn't just having nightmares. The next night, I marched downstairs after my siblings had fallen asleep and placed the watch square in the middle of our family room's coffee table. "What's this?" my mom had asked me, looking away from the show she was watching. "You'll see," was all I said, and plopped down on the couch next to Mom. Both her and Dad probably thought I was mad, but I was ready to not feel like I was a nutcase. I wanted them to know I didn't just have some overactive imagination. And right before I was about to drift off on the couch, after what felt like waiting for hours, it went off.
Someone's in the house.
Mom and Dad went pale, and Dad reached for the watch, which went silent. He looked nervous, but all I could do was smile. I had proved them wrong. "I told you, I'm not having nightmares," I shouted happily. Dad immediately reached for his tool bag he had sitting next to the door to take to work the next day, and pulled out a screwdriver. He opened the back of the digital watch, and we realized it only held an empty space where a watch battery should have been. To this day, I can't forget. I'm 17 now, and me, Mom, and Dad have an unspoken rule to never talk about the watch, but that doesn't mean I haven't recounted the story before. Only one time, a couple of months ago, I had dared to bring the subject up to my sisters, who were in the room next to mine when I was at that age. I always doubted what I'd heard, thinking maybe I'd made it up and it was all just a big nightmare. But Haley, who was 4 at the time, stopped me in the middle of me telling her how there was a watch mixed into the Pokemon bag, and she told me she already knew, that she remembered. The only reason I believed her is because when I asked her what noise the watch made, she said, "It doesn't make a noise. It talks. A man, he says someone's in the house." This is a story from my sister's perspective. When she was in her late teens, she went to the haunted complex known as Scary Dairy. I know, a horrifying name. I'll give you some history behind it. In Camarillo, California, in 1932, a mental institution was built. I'll quote an Atlas Obscura article. The hospital was at the forefront of treating conditions previously considered untreatable and developed novel therapeutic practices, behavioral as well as pharmaceutical, to help foster greater freedom and independence in patients previously confined to institutions. They built a vegetable and milk farm next to the mental institution to help along with the therapy, and the food farmed there fed the institution. In the 1960s, the dairy farm was disbanded and left to rot. The mental hospital shut its doors in 1997 and was turned into a university in 2002. The area around the dairy farm was bought by the university in 2009 and fenced off. My sister's story begins when her and a few friends decide to visit this place. They heard rumors of this place being haunted, and stories said a woman and her newborn child were sacrificed to this cult in the farm. They didn't really believe in this legend, but wanted to check it out anyways. 10 friends came in 2 cars, and they drove down. They wandered around, and it was creepy, but only in the way that an old, rotten building is creepy. Otherwise, it was uneventful. They stayed until nightfall and decided to leave. On the road out, they discovered a 10-foot wide hex circle lying in the middle of nowhere. It was made of rocks and filled with symbols. A genius, as my sister put it, decided that it would be a good idea to drive a few donuts through it to destroy it. Luckily, it was a dude in the other car. They parked my sister's on the side of the road, and everyone just stood and watched. The other car did a few circles, and the axles on one side broke so that it was leaning on one side. It was almost drivable, but they had to do it slowly. My sister noticed something was off when she heard footsteps walking in unison. She told everyone to be quiet and pulled a tire iron out of the car. Everyone noticed her grabbing the weapon and looked at where she was staring. Around 10 figures walked into the light of the cars wearing pure black. Hoods covered their heads, and all of them carried an old metal lunch pail, some silver, some black. Her friends started freaking out and grabbed weapons as well. One guy said they should fight these people, but my sister refused, saying they should wait. The figures slowly approached the party of friends. It was silent enough to hear a pin drop. The figures then walked right through the party and disappeared into the darkness. Everyone drove off as fast as they could and did not want to come back. My sister took the figures walking past them as a warning for them to never come back. What creeped her out the most was that she never saw these figures walking to this area. They just sat and waited until this hex circle was broken. Sometimes an idiot says, "Hey, we should visit that place again," and everyone shoots the idea down. This still scares her to this day. So, I was in the bathroom, just getting out of the shower when I heard voices outside of my bathroom window. My parents had gone to a concert, so it obviously couldn't be them that were roaming outside, and there wasn't really a big chance that any of our outdoor cats had suddenly discovered the power of speech, so I was immediately suspicious, with what I can only imagine is good reason. It was about 1 a.m. when I heard these voices, and keep in mind, I live out in the boonies, and our house was just recently renovated from what used to be a major shit show. Before we came here a year back, the secondary house was a common place for vandalism, a place where you could go to let off steam, or show your friends so they could let off steam. So the only thing that could feasibly be out there would either be a group of people who wanted to visit the place, some wildlife that had recently discovered a Danish dictionary, or something else. I wrote a quick text to my friends, one of whom was my best friend, Eli. Not like he could save me, since he lives across the Pacific Ocean, but it seemed like a good idea to at least let someone know what was going on while I considered whether or not it was worth checking out. I armed myself with my trusty softball bat and my dog Rio, who'd always protected me from anything dangerous. She's done that ever since we got her. If she's not man's best friend, then this girl's best friend certainly. Anyways, I waited for a few minutes for something to happen. Aside from the jolly voices outside my window, voices that could only be explained as intoxicated, drunken, and laughing. I was wary of these drunken voices in case they turned into intruder voices, but then they just stopped, died, mid-sentence, and then they appeared again, continuing the exact same sentence, the same word, almost like someone had cut their conversation in half and thrown the rest of it a few seconds ahead of time. It didn't seem intentional, and it confused me and freaked me out. Already riddled with social anxiety and anxiety of the common kind, this didn't calm me down, but being raised by confrontational parents, I didn't think it'd be a good idea to just ignore a potential intruder. So I opened the door, walked out onto the patio with my bat, and I let out a warning, something along the lines of, "Fuck off! I have a bat!" I then banged my bat on the side of the house just for good measure, and I almost crapped myself when the lights flickered, but really, I don't know what I had expected, smacking the house right where all the cords were connected. And then the sounds all stopped. No conversation, no anything, no footsteps, no leaving the premises, just pure silence. It's probably worth noting that none of my pets wanted to walk outside with me, not even my dog, who swore to protect me no matter what happened. She refused to follow me, but instead walked back into the house to what I can only assume would be my room. She has this habit of hiding under my bed when something scares her, like thunder or a popping balloon. I don't know what possessed me to do so, but I took up my phone, turned on the light on it, and started walking around the house, more accurately walking towards the bathroom window on the other side of the house. I looked down towards the lake, towards the window, and into the crack under the house, into the bush next to our empty hen house and the hen house itself. I even checked the creepy secondary house, checking everything that could possibly be looked at, and I came up with nothing. No people, no signs of people either, aside from the few lights in the houses a few thousand feet in each direction, but not any tracks in the mud other than mine. There was absolutely nothing out there aside from stars, the fish in our lake, and the silence. So I walked back inside again. I pulled the blinders, I locked the doors, all the windows, and I stayed awake for the rest of the night, waiting for the daylight to come, and, more importantly, waiting for my parents to come home. I never told them this story, and nothing like it has ever happened again, but it still haunts me. Thinking back, we did find meat hooks in a hidden freezer in the shed we've since then torn down. My dad suspected potential illegal slaughtering of farm animals, but we never really did check into it. It didn't seem to be our place to track down the previous owners, only to ask what really happened in that shed. Not to mention, none of us were really that interested. Until now. If it wasn't a person, then what? What kind of creature, what kind of person can do that to their own conversation? I live in a cute, small town smack dab in the middle of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. It's beautiful, enchanting even, but there are always weird things that the mountains hide. 2 hours south of where I live is the San Luis Valley. It's a huge, flat bowl of dusty nothing and farmland. Highway 17 is a long, straight road that runs from the base of the mountains to the center of this valley. Now, the locals like to share stories, witches, aliens, ghosts, and so on. There's even the story of Snippy the horse, but I digress. That's not my story. I'm just saying the valley can be weird. I was driving home on Highway 17. It was a clear night, and I was drinking caffeinated drinks because the straight, repetitive road and desert bushes was mind-numbing and teased sleep for unprepared drivers. Still, I wasn't too tired and didn't worry about falling asleep. I drove and drove, and because nothing seemed to change, it felt like time was slow. I kept checking the clock. 1 hour passed, then 2. I began to worry. I should have been at the base of the mountains by now. A curve and the climb to the mountain pass should have begun, yet it was still the straight, unending road. I began to speed over the limit. 2.5 hours since I left, and still I didn't see any change in the highway I was on. There was no moon to show me the mountain silhouettes, no sign or house or even other cars. I just had the road and bushes in my headlights and the stars above me. I was afraid to stop, and I didn't want to turn around, but I was also scared to keep going. Finally, after 3 hours, I was at the mountain pass. It took 1.5 hours longer than it should have. I couldn't figure out why. I guess maybe I was more tired than I thought I was. I told some friends of mine this, and what they shared didn't comfort me. One of my friends had a similar experience with her mom at night, but in her case, there was a green light in the sky that followed them for half of the 4-hour-long drive. Another told me he had driven in it in a whiteout snowstorm. He couldn't see anything in the blizzard 10 feet in front of him, except the other car's headlights when they passed. What was weird for him was the usually 1.5 hour drive somehow lasted 20 minutes, with him going a turtle's pace. Nowadays, I do my best not to take that road at night, or at least not by myself. I don't care much for people calling me superstitious, but I can't help being unnerved and careful now. I arrived home from school late on this particular day, as I had competed in a hockey tournament. I was only 12 at the time, so this was enough to completely exhaust me, and I was ready for bed as soon as I walked in the door of my house. My house is located in a very quiet part of South Africa. In fact, the nearest home is over 5 kilometers away. There are also not many roads nearby, only an old train track that runs past my house and into the forest that surrounds us. This silence never bothered me, until this particular night occurred. Now, I can't fall asleep without playing music. My dad wasn't around at the time, and he was away on a business trip. It was just my mom, my younger sister, who was 8 at the time, and I at home. As I said, I was exhausted, so I fell asleep first that evening, soon followed by my sister and then my mom. I slept soundly until approximately 3 a.m. when I was woken up by the sound of rattling. I slowly opened my eyes and peered around the room to find the source of the sound. It was dark, but it wasn't hard to accomplish this, as within 1 meter of me stood a large man with a ski mask over his head. He was looking through the drawer next to my bed. In my half-asleep state, I first thought it might have been my mom. Then I realized it was a man, and it couldn't have been my dad, as he was away. I rolled over in my bed to inspect further and was met with another, even larger man on the other side of me. He was carrying a black trash bag. I watched as this man picked up the torch that I kept next to my bed. He turned it on and shone it directly into my face. I managed to close my eyes before he noticed I was awake. I saw a gun hanging over this man's shoulder, thus didn't want to get in his way. I watched these 2 men take every valuable item from my room and shove it in the bag. I then heard the larger man say, "Wake the small girl," and I knew immediately they were talking about my sister. I also knew that if she was to experience what I was experiencing, she would never recover. She was only 8, after all. I decided in this moment that I would try to save my sister. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I sat up in my bed and screamed, "What the hell are you doing? Get the hell out of my house!" The 2 men seemed very shocked by my very sudden and loud outburst, and, luckily, decided to run instead of confronting me. I ran to my mom's room in tears at the realization of what had just happened and explained the situation to her. She called the police, and when they arrived, they explained that these men must have been watching us for several months. They knew when my dad wasn't going to be around, and they came prepared with all of the tools needed. On the train tracks outside my house, the police found a small material bag along with a few of our stolen items that must have been dropped while they were fleeing. This bag was filled with things including a sock, a bottle of chloroform, a rope, and some kind of cattle whip. I don't like to think about what they were planning to do with these things. This experience has shown me that ghosts and other paranormal entities are not what I should be afraid of. People spend so much time talking about ghosts and demons when the real monsters are walking alongside us in the familiar form of a human. So, originally, I am from Nova Scotia, Canada, but my mom and dad lived in New Brunswick before I was born, specifically outside the city of Moncton, and one night, something weird happened. The lights would turn on and off. My dad has insomnia, and on this night he looked out the window and saw a glow on the other side of a hill. He thought maybe a house was on fire and called the fire department to alert them of a possible blaze. They found a car burning near the back of our property. After the fire was out, the police recovered some items from the car, but they never told Dad what it was. Cut to last year. I was 17 and we'd moved to Halifax in Nova Scotia, a bordering province. I was out with some friends and we decided we want to go out and camp. I told them my parents' old house had a lot of land out back, and unless someone was out late at night, no one would find us. So we drove over 2 hours to get there and set up camp fairly late. I told them about the car thing, and we decided, because we're dumb kids, to go and see if we could find anything. It was around 10 at night in the winter, and we decided to go look without winter clothes, armed with only a phone flashlight. When we got close to the spot where the car burned, we could see someone. We ducked down behind a tree log, thinking it was the new owner or something. After about a minute of hiding, I peeked over and I could see the person again carrying a shovel and digging. When the digging sound stopped, I heard the shovel drop and the sound of feet running. I peeked again to see him disappear into the woods. When he was gone, we looked around to see what he was running from. We couldn't see anything, so we went to look at the hole in the ground. Inside, we found a book. I was freaking out, and so were my friends. I never buried anything out there, and neither did my dad. One of my friends picked up the book and saw it was actually a journal. Inside was a list of numbers 1 through 18 on a single page, and on the back of the book was the initials M.W. McGray. Before we could do anything, the man living in my old house found us and called the police. We got charged with trespassing, and they took the journal. It wasn't until we Googled the initials that we found out it could be from Michael Wayne McGray, a Canadian serial killer who claimed he killed up to 18 people. According to my dad, the car burned in early 1998 or late 1997. Michael Wayne McGray was arrested in February 1998 in, you guessed it, Moncton, New Brunswick. I still don't know what to think about it, and I don't know if anything is connected, but even if not, it still terrifies me. I grew up in a small country town. There wasn't a single traffic light, and it remains that way to this day. The nearest major town was 40 kilometers away in New South Wales, Australia. When I was a small child, I lived on the family farm. The nights were dark as can be, and the sky was lit with stars from east to west. Thunderstorms in that area were amazing because of the magnetic rock in the mountains, and it was always special when it happened. I would sit on my bed and watch out the window. The flashes of light ripping through the sky and the boom of the thunder would shake everything. It was calving season for the cattle that my family kept, and without fail, 1 or 2 would be stillborn or not make it the first week due to the line breeding, which is breeding related cattle to build bigger cows or cows that make more milk. It's a pretty common practice. One week during September when I was 5 or 6, we had a series of storms thrash the area. Trees were down, power lines had been cut, and the phones were out too. We were fine, but effectively cut off from town for a few days. After the 3rd day of storms, my father returned from the large shed that we had the pregnant cows in. He was visibly upset, and his hands were covered in fresh blood, but this wasn't new, as it happened every now and then. A calf would die, and he would cut it up and throw it on an ant's nest to strip the bones. But this time, he was shaken. My older brother would help, as he was about 11 years older than me, but my dad stopped him and told him to stay out of the shed. My dad was a lovely guy, but when he told you to do something, he had good reason to. My brother, being 16 or 17 at the time, didn't listen, and the next day told me that I had to help feed the cows. I got my raincoat on and my gumboots and went with him to the shed. As we neared the building, I started to feel sick, like something was wrong. As we got close to the shed door, a stench of dung and rotten something filled the air. Instead of hearing the cows bellowing like normal, there was silence. My brother edged his way to the door and held his hand up, telling me to stop, and then motioned for me to be quiet. As he pulled the door slightly ajar, the rusty hinges of the door squeaked, and then we heard a sound that I will never forget till the day I die. The sound of chewing and the snapping of bones. My brother froze in place, his face white and pale. He grabbed me by the shirt and carried me, running back to the house, screaming for my dad as we ran. All I remember is Father getting the old break-action shotgun out of his room and telling us to lock the house. It was a long, silent wait for what seemed like hours, but was only 10 minutes past when we heard the shots. My dad walked back to the house shortly after, and behind him the shed was smoking and I could see flames. I asked him a few years later about that day, but he always said, "Leave it alone. Talking about it won't help anyone." My brother said the same sort of thing. We sold the farm a couple of years after that, and before we left, the side of the shed was bulldozed flat and everything was buried in a trench on the edge of the property. My dad passed away in 2010, and to this day, my older brother still seems haunted by what he saw. Just a note for this last story, the way I read the story is how it was sent to me. What the writer saw was not fully described, but the title of the email was Cow from Hell. I will let you decipher whatever meaning you wish from this. Special thanks to the Patreon family. The names you see on screen are just some of the people who financially contribute to this channel. Whether they are passionate about dark matters and true crime cases, or the other dark content on this channel, their support cannot be overstated. If you are interested in supporting the channel, information is in the description, but even if you only continue to support by watching, thank you. And of course, a special thanks to the subscribers who chose to share their stories with us today. Here come the mispronunciations. Here we go. Codename Utopian, Nicole, Derek, the Yolorosa, Logan, Tara, Lucas, and Hexes86. If you've had a personal terrifying encounter you've had, it can be paranormal or not, please feel free to send it to subscriberstorytime@gmail.com, and your experience might end up in the next subscriber storytime. If you wish to stay anonymous, please mention that in your email. Thank you for watching the video, friends, and most of all, thank you for continuing to support little old me, whether that's through contributing on Patreon, buying merchandise, or just continuing to watch the videos. A sincere thank you from me. Okay, I'm done. Thank you, seriously. Stay safe, friends, and have a good night.